"There's something out there, kiddo, watching us," our father said to us aboard the Zaraman, as he stared out into the bottomless void. And so begins the first chronological mention of the entity known as the Man in the Wall. In this video, I will discuss what this entity is and what it wants. I do not believe that it is just our imagination or an insanity, and I will cover that too. The Lotus and Margulis before her had both believed that people can suffer from void exposure to the extent where they experience hallucinations, much like deep-sea divers can suffer the bends if they go too deep. Our bodies and minds are essentially failing in a region of space that is beyond our comprehension, according to these two. Teshin says that the void is a place that dreams and sleeps, and that the void and the real world are two separate places, two different places of existence. Now, the void does have a physical space on the galaxy map. However, I also believe that it exists in a metaphysical way alongside our own world, our real physical world, separated by a dimensional wall. The star chart void is a break between these two dimensions, where the space of the void floods into our real space. This can be seen when we enter into void mode, when we slip between these two dimensions that we straddle. However, our Tenno, upon awakening their own powers, has begun to be haunted and tormented by an inhuman entity, the Man in the Wall. I believe that the Man in the Wall is not simply our madness. I have spoken about the mental afflictions that we do actually suffer in my false memories video, which I'll link below. While the Man in the Wall exacerbates and takes delight in the confusion that we suffer, he isn't just another symptom of our confusion or our mental health. There are too many instances where the entity knows more than we could possibly know, ruling out that it is just madness. However, it is clear that it draws from our memories and our minds, hence the way it looks like us, and the fact it uses our father's phrase when addressing us. Various Orokin era survivors tell us of their notions of the void. The Queen, for example, says, "The endless void, the gazing abyss, the bottomless ocean of horror. It coiled itself around your tender heart." This makes it feel as though the void is actually alive, that has conscious or sentient thought. It gazes. It coiled. Teshin also believes that we straddle the real world and the void, and the void is a separate world that watches and dreams. Again, these are the actions of a sentient being, and these characters both speak of the void as though it is alive. The Orokin knew far more about the nature of the void than we do, since they studied it far more extensively than we have. This leaves it open that the Man in the Wall is either an embodiment of this living void, or an aspect or a creature from within the void. Either way, the fact that the void is sentient very much leaves it open that the Man in the Wall is a real entity. The first chronological appearance that we have of this entity within the story of Warframe is when the Zaraman was travelling through the void space on its way to colonize Tau. Insanity began to sweep the ship. Madness gripped the mind of the adults as they looked out to the inexplicable physics of the void. And while violence gripped the ship, there was one Tenno who saw beyond the current predicament, Rel, and he sensed something or someone else. Instead of madness, Rel thought that the parents were being manipulated by something else. When he was confronted by his mother, as we see in the Rel comic, he says, not mama anymore, something else. Haven't figured it out yet. He doesn't think it's a symptom or madness. He thinks his mother is something else. It is no longer his mother. Rel then focuses his mind with his Donda, blanking out the scene around him, to try and figure out who or what this is. He says, "I have something to do." someone to figure out. This is who he would tell Palladino's ancestors of, the man in the wall, a being cold and inhuman, with alien motivations that are beyond our comprehension. In the time between the Zariman incident and our own awakening, we would have been sheltered by Margulis and then the Lotus, induced into the second dream, which would silence the deafening noise of the void. Rael was offered no such protection and comfort. The veil was all he had, and with them as his shroud, he would continue to investigate and apparently even go so far as protect the rest of the Tenno against this threat from the other side. He achieves this by entering into a battle of the minds, Tenno versus Entity, which eventually over time he would lose, and the man in the wall would possess him before we have to destroy him. This could be one explanation as to why we don't really experience much of his interference until Rael's demise. After that, he is very much watching and manipulating our minds, with increased frequency. In-game, we first experience the man in the wall during the conclusion of the War Within quest. While the Queen is invading our mind, we relive the events leading up to the death of our parents. After we have awoken from our slumber, we would eventually face these queens. This involves us confronting our past upon the 10-0 and remembering what happened there. The reopening of our mind also coincides with our first sighting of this entity. He uses the same kiddo expression that our father did when he first sensed something was watching us. At the climax of this quest, we are possessed for a moment, as the entity speaks through us, and what he says depends upon what choice we make regarding the Kuva. Let's dig in a little bit to what each of his responses maybe implies. If you choose to dispose of the Kuva, the entity says this: "You mad at me, kiddo? Did you forget? You owe me." If you control the Kuva, he reminds us that we are nothing without him. If we consume, he seems almost pleased. So, if we read between the lines, it seems that the void entity wants us to consume, as we asks if we are angry at him if we destroy it, because he wanted us to consume. If we control, he reminds us that we are nothing without him, given that we get our void powers from him. Teshin even says that the power within us is the power of the void. This line also gives strength that he is the void, or even that he is speaking on behalf of it, and that we are nothing without the void, as it is the void within us that gives us the power. Let's just say that the Kuva would empower the void power within us, or at least give us some more strength in some regards. This would explain why the void entity, the man in the wall, would be happy with us taking it, because not only does it make him, the void aspect of us, stronger, but it improves our capabilities. I will later show that I believe his final goal is to make us a vessel, and therefore making ourselves stronger is of benefit to him in the long run. Either way, our mind is now open to his influence at this point, most likely as a result of opening our minds to our void powers, and therefore the void itself. Coupled with Rael losing his battle at this point, the man in the wall is now free to haunt us, and ultimately, he needs a new body to possess. It's unnecessary for me to describe the chronology of events that happen in the Chains of Harrow. However, let's dig deep into some of the lore points. The title man in the wall, in regards to this entity's appearance, is in the eye of the beholder. He is only a man because Rael saw a mirror of himself, a male, much as we do. It only appears that way because it is trying to communicate with us, and therefore it takes on a facsimile of who we are. This being is far beyond any kind of gender concerns, any physical concerns. It's just the projection that it chooses to take. The rap, tap, tap that we get in this quest to me is supposed to invoke feelings that the man on the wall is trying to communicate or push or break his way through the barrier that separates the void and the physical world. He is tapping against the wall between them. He is whispering from the wall between these two worlds, the worlds which we straddle, the void and the physical. That's what Teshin tells us, that we exist between these two worlds. When the void granted us powers, part of us actually began to exist within the void. This relationship to the void seems to give the indifferent some kind of access to us. When we activate the void mode power, we slip from this world into the void, which again highlights the fact we now exist between the two. Indeed, when the powers return, the man on the wall is so quickly able to sense us and possess us. Indeed, this is the fate of Rel eventually, in time, as we see him possessed and we must kill his surrogate body in order to free him from his possession. The man on the wall only appears as transference energy in this quest, because that is all that's left of the real Rel. He is in a transference loop with his Warframe. His physical body is no more, so the man on the wall doesn't possess this. He possesses what is left of Rel, which is the energy within his Warframe. This is the man on the wall's first attempt to get into our world, and imagine how much more successful he'd be if he took a real physical Tenno, much like ourselves. As mentioned before, the Veil call this entity the Indifference, and the Lotus senses how cold and emotionless this entity is while it possesses Rel's transference energy. It is nothing human. It is the void, attempting a facsimile of a human in order to communicate and appear before us. The void is a dimension which is alive, and this very aspect goes way beyond any laws of physical reality. And the only way for it to make sense to us, to our tiny human minds, is to create avatars and mirror the person it is speaking to, for it would be incomprehensible otherwise. This is why it uses the same colloquialisms as our father. I certainly don't think this was our actual father, that our father became the man on the wall. What is more likely is that it's delving into our mind for language, for kind of props, anything like that to use to communicate with us, and it has grasped hold of this line that our father said to us when it was watching us. But now comes the big question: what does it actually want? What is its aims? And what does it want with us in the other Tenno? One thing that we notice is that the entity seems to delight in taunting us. During the Chimera prologue, it giggles the whole time after it sends spectres after us. As highlighted in my video about memories, it seems pleased in the post-sacrifice moments that we believe that we somehow killed Umber's son, or that he was our son's. Despite this not actually being our memory, it's happy that we have internalized this memory and we're confused. The silly poses that it pulls upon our ship also shows that it's taunting us, while using our father's words. While it is hard to determine exactly what the entity wants, I can posit a few suggestions based upon some of its behaviours and actions. The first thing is it's absolutely fascinated by us. We are an anomaly that represents both the void and the physical realm. It is likely the entity wants to learn about our world through the Tenno, which have connections to both spaces. Which then leads on to my second kind of point, and the main objective I feel, is that we are a bridge to be used. The entity wants to possess us, control us, certainly not destroy us. It possesses Rel, and it arguably helps us in the Chimera prologue. It does lead us to Ballas, and then ultimately the Paracesis. Why? Well, the only logical conclusion is it wants us to win the battle against the sentience. It wants us to survive the upcoming war. And he wants us to grow strong and survive. Why? Because he wants us as a surrogate body in order to enter the physical realm, as a bridge between the two worlds. So, my conclusions. The man in the wall is either a void being, or in fact is the void, or an aspect of the void. Both are entirely possible. The void is a world itself that thinks and watches, yet is ultimately separate from our world. Yet we represent a hybrid, a bridge which bridges the gap between the void and the real world. This is what happened to Rel. He was the first attempt to enter our real world. Half void, half human. We are a bridge that can allow them entry. I feel the conversation where it shows that he's happy at our failing mental state shows that he wants us to lose and weaken our mind, like Rel's did over time. Go back to another person who tried to take over our mind, the Queen. Teshin states that she wants us to be filled with despair so that only she remains. What if this is the same kind of practice that the entity wants with us? To weaken and destroy our minds so that it can dominate us, much like a Warframe. Fortunately for us, the first attempt failed. Rel was absent of physical body, and therefore the entity was trapped as transference energy. However, now, the entity has its sights set on a real physical tenno, and that's us, to take over our bodies and enter our world. And to that end, they will not let any harm come to us until they get what they want. So that's my take on the Man in the Wall, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Of course, a lot of speculation on my part, but I feel like this is where all the kind of storylines are driving us to. This is why there's some confusion as to why it seems to torment us yet protect us at the same time. It doesn't want us to come to any physical harm, but yet it wants our mental state to fail so that it can take over our minds. Thanks for watching, guys. Give me a like if you enjoyed my lore, and subscribe for more Warframe lore content. Thank you.